afternoon. I'm Lisa Hansel, the Editor-in-Chief of NAEYC's peer-reviewed journal, Young Children, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. I'd like to start in particular by thanking all of the early childhood educators who have joined us this afternoon. We know you are busy professionals, and we really deeply appreciate that you have chosen to spend time with us. I know that you'll find that this time is really well spent, as we are joined by three experts who are cautious, intentional, and enthusiastic about how technology can enrich young children's learning. Chip Donahue is the Dean of Distance Learning and Continuing Education at the Erickson Institute and Director of Erickson's Technology and Early Childhood Center. In addition, he's a Senior Fellow and Advisor for the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media at St. Vincent College. Roberta Schomburg is a Professor Emerita at Carlow University, a Senior Fellow at the Fred Rogers Center, and a consultant to the Fred Rogers Company and Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Chip and Roberta co-chaired the working group that revised the 2012 NAEYC and Fred Rogers Center Joint Position Statement on Technology. They also wrote an article for the September issue of Young Children that sums up new research and lessons learned in the 5 years since the position statement was released. We'll provide links to the position statement and the article during the webinar. We all agree that staying up to date on technology research is important, but if there's anything more important, it's understanding what best practices with technology look like in the classroom. Sabrina Burrows, an early childhood educator at Eagle Academy Public Charter School, is here to share and reflect on some of her terrific projects. Sabrina had an IT background before becoming an educator and is now also a mentor with the Erickson Institute's Technology and Early Childhood Center. So as you can see, this is going to be a real treat. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping details. I'm sure you all will have a lot of questions, so as you think of those questions, go ahead and write them in the question box that's on the side of your screen, the left side of your screen. Chip, Roberta, and Sabrina will answer as many questions as possible at the end of their presentation. One more thing. Some people using a telephone line may experience a slight delay. You'll probably have the best experience using the sound on your computer. All right, that's it for the housekeeping. We're ready to get started. So, Chip, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Lisa. I'm actually going to hand off right away to my colleague, Roberta Schomburg. Delighted you're all with us today. This is very exciting for us. We've been thinking about the 5 years of the position statement and what we've learned and where we go from here. So I'm going to hand it off to Roberta and let her get us started.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you're all here. We welcome you, and we're going to be talking about the Joint Position Statement and the updates. And I wanted to start by saying that it's probably safe to say that when we started this process in 2009, I believe, was that right, Chip?
Yeah,
2009, there was a lot of controversy about technology and young children. And so one of the early learnings was that we had to do some consensus building. And NAEYC was committed to that dialogue. And so we learned that consensus building is hard work. It took us 3 years. It takes time. It is very messy. And there is conflict, and there is conflict and conversation, but in the end, it was well worth it. So we were delighted when we finally came to the position statement that we have now, and that we felt that people felt their voices had been heard. So we're delighted now to look at what are the updates since 2012. So let me just go over some of the big ideas and keywords from 2012. One is that tools, that we were looking at technology and interactive media as tools for use in classrooms. That their use has to be intentional. It can't just be whatever is the new technology of the day, but it has to be integrated in intentional ways. It has to be appropriate to the ages and stages of the children, and integrated fully into the curriculum. We have been advocating a balanced approach, and the use of technology in interactive ways, where children are using it together, co-viewing, and talking about things as they're using technology. Other big ideas to remember are that content is really important, and that was one of the big controversies around technology, was that much of the content was inappropriate at that time, and the context is important. We also have to make sure that there is equity and access, that we have technology available to all of our children in early childhood programs, and that we prepare them to be able to use technology as they move through the educational system. Finally, we recognize that professional development was essential if we are going to be able to do what our goal was, which was to have professionals who could select technology, they could use it in their classroom, they could integrate it into the curriculum, and then evaluate it. And so that the process of continuing to evaluate is an ongoing process. And we know that professional development is important for that, both at the pre-service level, but also ongoing at the elbow professional development for our early childhood professionals. I'm delighted now to be able to turn this over to Sabrina, who's going to talk about the position statement in action. And she's going to share some of the stories that she has from her own work in working with technology in early childhood classrooms. So Sabrina, let me hand it off to you.
Thank you, Roberta and Tripp. I'm really excited to be able to share my experiences with you. First off, I do have a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Information Systems, which drove my interest in bringing computers to my learning environment when I received my early childhood master's degree. So I was able to capture those two and infuse those two processes together, those learning processes, and then bring those auspicious traits together as one process. So as I was dissecting the idea of bringing technology into learning, my school developed a technology education learning program with the Erickson Institute. And what I saw as a very feasible and wonderful opportunity for myself is to be able to follow Erickson's mission statement, to have children have equitable opportunities to realize their potential, and using technology to do that. And then when I looked at the Rogers position statement, I looked at how the challenges would increase the rigor in learning and also become interactive and engaging learning opportunities to foster new thinking. As I thought about that, I realized in my classroom that I would have to use technology or those specific tools to enhance their learning experience, but it needed to be effective and developmentally appropriate. So with that, we follow a lot of the guidelines from ISTE. So we do follow a standard which makes the content more specific and intentional when we deliver the access to technology. I work in an environment where a lot of my students come from underserved communities. So we do have to make sure that it is a home and school process. So inviting my parents and my families in to learn with me, having something like Media Literacy Day, where I invited the parents to come and look at the technology that we're using, see how intentional it is, and see what the content looks like when we're putting into real practice. The Eagle's mission is to develop awe and wonder, and one of the things that technology infused into our educational process offers is the creativity, the different learning styles, the rigor, and then we do problem-based learning. One of the activities or the processes that we used last year was to actually research something that was out there in the world where the students didn't know a lot, but even my 5-year-olds were able to do research and engage in finding out what it was like to be hungry. So we looked at world hunger, and we used the blue screen to actually develop a video to talk about what it's like when you're hungry and you just need to find food, and there are people out there who don't have food. So we've used it to find intentional practices and also to do hands-on learning. such as going out in the community when we were studying three-dimensional shapes, taking our iPad and taking actual pictures of trash cans and mailboxes and trying to figure out which three-dimensional structure that looked like, going to the water and finding out how the water affects our environment, capturing in the moment through extended learning opportunities, and then going back and looking at it to put it into different genres and practices. We looked at it, we wrote about it, we talked about it, we designed it, we used some science-based activities to design it. We did some factual experiences where we were creating digital photos to look at the learning that we had captured just using iPads and in our school environment. One of the things that I absolutely loved, my experience was with my students who didn't understand what they might see at a planetarium. So I literally transformed my classroom into a planetarium. I darkened the entire room. I invited the parents in, and we literally took them to, I believe it was Arkansas. We took them to a planetarium in Arkansas. And although there is a planetarium just up the street from me, the resources that we would need to take all of my learners and their families to the planetarium and just capture that experience was just, it was auspicious just doing it inside the classroom. And the awe and the wonderment were right there for us to see. One of the things that I really like is the fact that my students take their tablets or they use the smart board, and it engages them in social experiences where they're able to look and share and have effective learning and shared experiences with a 5-year-old or 3-year-old colleague. So it looks very, very, very purposeful as they drive their own cars and use their tools to engage them in this resource, which expands their thinking. So I wanted to definitely share some of the tools that we've used: Book Creator, Drawing Pad. We've done virtual field trips just like the one that I mentioned. We actually watched the bald eagle that was at the Arboretum have our eaglets, and the kids were so engaged. They were going home, and they were telling their parents, I can't go to sleep now. I want to see the eagles. So, I had parents like, what are these eagles? Tell me all about it. They had their computers on in the middle of the night so the parents could watch while the kids were sleeping. And it's just the thought process just increases and increases their ability to become digital citizens. And it also gives them that critical thinking where they can take this tool and just engage in intensified and more enhanced learning. So what I'd like is that we also took the technology to the teachers, and we did a program called Taking It to the Tech. So we took the programs that the kids were using, the applications that the students were using, and we allowed the teachers to practice those and use those tools. And the teachers had the same awe and wonderment, creativity, and this authentic engagement just to talk about what they were doing. You could see teachers making books or teachers designing programs where they were talking to their students, leaving video messages when they were not able to be at school. And with the emojis and the characters that they were using is exciting. And it makes me smile when I talk about it because I get a lot of great feedback from not only my colleagues, but from the Erickson Institute on the reflections of what it looks like in actual practice and how we attach it to the ISTE standards. And it looks like a lesson where it's math, it's science, it's social studies, it's ELA, but it's also just auspicious to watch them see it in action and just talk about it in whatever genre it attaches to, and then take that tech and write about it. So I'm creating writers, authors, illustrators, photographers, and some of them are 3 years old, and it's really wonderful to see. The one thing that I wanted to share also is modeling. And as research has found it through evidence-based practice, we have to make sure that we model what the kids are seeing, what the kids are doing, and that it's appropriate tech integration in the classroom. And if we infuse it purposefully, we do student inquiry and we do environmental learning, I think it feeds into what they're getting out of the practice. One of the things that I like that Roberta mentioned were the tools. making sure that they were intentional, appropriate, integrated, balanced, and interactive, then that's how we deliver those tools within our lesson planning, within the classroom, and beyond within our PDs. We talk about how the technology is purposeful, and the administrators look at the technology and how we piece that into what we are doing to engage the learners. Thank you, Roberta, for this opportunity to share my experiences.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was really wonderful hearing all of your ideas and the stories about how you're able to do this and what your beliefs are about it. And I think it's terrific that you've got a background in computer science as well as early childhood education. I think we're going back to Chip.
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay. I think we may have an audience poll coming up. So, Chip, you're on.
Thanks, Roberta. Just a quick comment back to Sabrina as well. For Roberta and I and all the work we put into this position statement, if there are other educators out there who have been inspired in any way by the statement to do the kind of work that you're doing, then all of this, all these years of hard work has been worth it. It's truly inspiring. And, Fred Rogers used to say that if you love what you do in front of kids, they'll catch your enthusiasm. And I think we all just caught your enthusiasm, Sabrina, so thank you for that. We're going to go.
My pleasure.
An audience poll now, and it's really about familiarity with the position statement. So the statement came out in March of 2012, and we're asking you to think about how familiar you are with the statement, from not at all to very familiar. And I think I'm handing off to the poll takers at this point.
Yes, thank you, Chip. So we will give folks just about maybe 15 seconds or so to choose their answer, and we will show the audience the results. Give it just a little bit longer here for folks to weigh in. Okay, so that's it. And Chip, take a look at those results.
All right, so we're all over the map. We're from looks like around 31% not very familiar or just a little bit familiar, and then moderately and another dip up, a rise up to very familiar. So we still have a long way to go in terms of really understanding the position statement and the guidelines and principles that came out of it. But being on this webinar right now is a great step. You're going to have to move from not at all familiar to somewhat familiar at the end of this webinar for those of you who have been paying attention to that. Okay, so I'm going to tick through this kind of quickly. In our article in Young Children, we go into more detail about these other statements and what we learned, but I think it's important to honor the other work that has happened. Our statement came out in 2012, in March of 2012, and at the time it was the only big position statement set of guidelines that were out there for educators. What it did was generate a lot of interest and work from other organizations. So I'm just going to show you some of the other groups that have put statements out since then, and then we'll talk about what we learned from all of them together. So in 2014, the RAND Corporation came out with Using Early Childhood Education to Bridge the Digital Divide, and actually had 6 other reports that went with that. They did a number of convenings around that. In 2014, 0 to 3 came out with their Screen Sense report and a lot of resources around that as well. Again, in the Young Children article, you can find the links to these actual reports, and that's exciting and great. It was an important moment for us in our work as advocates when 0 to 3 looked at the research and thought about very young children and technology, because that continues to be probably the most controversial part of the conversation. In 2015, High Scope Foundation came out with a Using Technology Appropriately in the Classroom statement. The Institute of Medicine, so the IOM report in 2015, while it was about lots of things, there were specific mentions of technology, of professional development, of what teachers needed to know about technology and needed to be able to do. And so again, it took the whole conversation up to another level, given the work that was done to understand where we were. In 2016, something quite amazing happened. First, it started with the Office of Educational Technology in the DOE, came out with their Future Ready Learning, their national technology plan. And then from there, we went to, I'm going to jump down one on the slide, to the Education Department and HHS came out with a joint statement, a technology policy brief and guiding principles for use of technology with early learners. What was really remarkable about this was it came out the same day in the same place as the American Academy of Pediatrics updated statement on media and young minds and their family media use plan. I had the good fortune of being in the room when both of these were announced, and I'll be honest, I didn't know DOE and HHS were going to announce a statement that same time. It was very powerful to have the pediatricians who we all look to for guidance, and then to have DOE and HHS all on the same program and talking about position statements back and forth. It showed that we really are building some consensus. In 2017, there were two really important STEM reports that came out. One came out from here in Chicago, Early Childhood STEM Working Group. The report was the Early STEM Matters. And then the Cooney Center in New America put out STEM Starts Early. And again, you have links to both of those in our article. The ISTE came out with new standards for educators in 2017. And the Fred Rogers Center and the Tech Center working together, Dr. Katie Pasiga, our Early Career Research Fellow, took a look at what we know and what's new and different since the position statement came out with a particular lens on social and emotional learning. So, another audience poll. So since 2012, I've just given you the mad dash through a lot of other reports that have come up with, been issued since then. So there's a lot of information out there now. How influential do you think these reports and statements have been on how you integrate technology with young children? From not at all influential to somewhat to moderately to very influential. And again, I'll let the folks at NAEYC launch the poll.
Okay, thanks very much, Chip. We have launched the poll, and once again, we will wait just about 15-20 seconds and show everyone the results. All right, so you should have some results showing up on your screen here.
Yep. They're popping around. Nice bell-shaped curve there. We've got some not so influential and some very, and most of us are finding ourselves somewhere in the middle. And I think that makes sense. It's hard to keep up with all of this. Part of the work that we've been doing at the Tech Center at Erickson is to try to figure out what connects with each other, what are we learning from all of these that can help us. But let me go back a step to the American Academy of Pediatrics because they get so much play. I travel a lot internationally talking about technology and young children. No matter where I go, Singapore, Australia, Malaysia, they always ask about the American Academy of Pediatrics statement. So this statement that comes out from the Academy has real weight to it, is really significant in the way in which people think about what the pediatricians say and what should our practice look like. So on the screen right now you see a very quick summary of their main recommendations, starting with no screens for children under 18 months. And we could stop and talk about that for a long time. What I really want to talk about is the one exception that the Academy recognized was video chat. That a toddler Skyping with a grandmother who lives halfway across the world or halfway across the country, that can be very positive screen time for a child. So again, as in the position statement, we talked about very young children and that any technology use, if there was any technology use, it had to support relationships and the caregiving interaction with the child. So I think it's interesting that we actually have some research data that suggests that that's a very positive thing for a young child when it's mediated by their parent and when it's a socially contingent conversation with a loved one on the other end. From 18 months to 2 years, the Academy is saying it's okay to introduce high-quality media. They're encouraging parents to watch with children and help them understand what they're seen. So again, the emphasis on high quality content really matters. From 2 to 5 years, 1 hour daily limit, high quality, watch it together, connect it to the real world. This was the one where the most controversy was going to percolate, of course, because we have the new Common Sense Media report last week that suggests that children are using twice that much media than the 1 hour limit. So lots to think about there around how we think about kids' time and how much time is left for media. The Academy was quite interesting. The way they looked at it was that let's start with all the things we know are essential in a child's life and how much time they take each day, meal time and bathing and reading time and time with family and time with friends, and start to estimate how much time is left for media and let us, instead of starting with media time and seeing what's left for everything else. And that's a pretty healthy way to think about this. The statement this time around, I think, was more descriptive than prescriptive. It really gave parents more realistic tips for how to engage with technology, told them what to do instead of what not to do. And I think that's an important switch in the way in which we message to parents about their own media use. Recognize that parents' media use and their role as media mentors was very influential. But raised concerns that we've been talking about in our work as well about parent media behavior and how do you get parents to be reflective and thoughtful about how they use media in front of children, since children are watching and learning their media behavior from those loved ones in their families and in their homes. And then last, I made a comment about this notion of concerns about displacement. I think Roberta would agree that one of the things we heard the most when we were developing the position statement was this exactly. What has to go out if technology comes in? What will children not be doing if they're spending time with screens? And again, it's a valid question. I like the flip around that of what's essential for children to do, and then how does technology fit in, is a nice way, I think, for us to flip that over. Our colleague, Michael Rich, who goes by the name the Mediatrician at Boston Children's Hospital, says this: "Well, we owe our kids is a rich and diverse experience. Our focus should be on living well with media rather than opposing or restricting it." I love that phrase, living well with media. The definition of living well with media is going to vary for each of us here on the webinar, in your own classrooms, your own programs, and in the homes of each of the children. There's no one answer to what living well with media means, but aiming that, having that be our goal, I think is a really powerful idea, and I thank Michael for that nudge.
Before we go on, Chip, I just noticed there was a question about the use of technology and media with children under 3, and I think that fits so well with this discussion that we're having about what the AAP is saying. And I think the touch screen really changed the conversation, as did video chatting. But there are also uses of the camera where we can take pictures of toddlers doing things and then share them with them. So I think that we can talk a little bit more about that later. But I think what the AAP did was clarify that there are times when video is very appropriate for even the youngest children.
Yeah, thank you, Roberta. The acknowledgement that these tools are already in their hands and they're at home, and in many cases they're in our early childhood classrooms, then what's the responsibility we have as early childhood educators to define what's appropriate and to help parents know how to manage media? And I think that really was the charge that came out of the position statement, was that we do have a responsibility as things have changed so fast to help parents navigate the digital age. So I won't tick through all of these. You can see them on the screen, but the principles that came out from the Department of Education and HHS really reinforced things that we had been saying and that were said in the position statement. When it's used properly, it can be a tool for learning. That also implies that when it's used improperly, it might not be such a great tool for learning. So I think that's important. It's about proper, appropriate use. Technology should be used to increase access. These issues of access and equity are going to continue to be a challenge. Check out the Common Sense Media census report from last week and dig in deep to that around issues of how children in different kinds of homes and at different socioeconomic statuses are using technology and how much they're using technology. We've got some work to do still. This next one is so important, and again, Roberta and I were representing the Rogers Center when we did this work, and Fred would have believed that it's all about relationships, right? So using technology to strengthen relationships, not to interrupt them. And then this notion of co-viewing, of interacting, that kids learn more when they use media with someone else is a tenet of all of our work as well. So Dr. Katie Pasiga did a report for the Fred Rogers Center and the Technology and Early Childhood Center. Some of the findings that came out of her look, of her review of the literature for the last 5 years, was that it's only a snapshot of child's technology and media use that's captured in the literature. When we issued the position statement, there was very little research on touchscreens that we could go on. It was just starting. Remarkably, 5 years later, we're still waiting for a nice body of evidence around how children use these tools. So it's starting, it's coming, but we don't have the full picture yet. Adults were often described as being present but without presence, and when children were using technology. I think that's a powerful phrase. The idea of the adult is there but not engaged. Parent is there, nearby, but and adjacent but not engaged. So how do we up the level of presence? One, we got to get the adult there with the child, and two, then how do we get them to engage together? Room for growth in how media and technologies are designed to support the whole child. This was a big part of Katie's work. Social emotional development and technology are not mutually exclusive. We didn't find lots out there around social emotional learning. It's an area that we really want to dig in, again, because Roberta and I come out of the work of Fred Rogers. We're so committed to this notion that these are tools for strengthening relationships and creating positive social emotional learning opportunities. And Roberta, I'm going to hand back to you to talk about this.
Okay. And as Chip has said, this was a joint position statement between NAEYC and the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning in Children's Media at St. Vincent College. So, of course, Fred's work permeates this entire statement. But there were some specific things that we wanted to mention here. And these are Fred's 6 principles of learning that apply to technology as well as everything else that he has talked about. And one is a sense of worth, of self-worth. We certainly want to make sure that any use of technology supports a child's sense of who he or she is and supports their sense of competence. And so that's an important aspect to keep in mind. We also want to make sure that technology supports the sense of trust, that they can trust in the people that are helping them with technology to make good decisions for them, but also that they can learn to trust their own initiative as they interact with these materials. We want to make sure that we're supporting children's curiosity and helping them to look for new things, using an iPad outside to look at a worm that's crawling around. Any way that we can think to use technology to support curiosity is a good experience for children. We also want them to improve in their capacity to look and listen carefully. Children are very good at looking at things and noticing things, so we as adults also have to be available to look carefully with them and to listen to what they hear. When they hear an airplane above, to stop and talk about what that might be, and then perhaps look at pictures or photos of an airplane so that they have a better understanding. Capacity to play. We have to be playful in our interactions with children around technology and give them opportunities to explore cause and effect and to integrate technology into their playfulness. And then there are times of solitude. And I think that there are times when we also have to realize that children just need to pull away. And maybe they need to pull away from technology for periods of time so they can have that chance to reflect and to be alone with themselves for a little bit of time. And however we can support that with children, I think is helpful. There are times we encourage children to interact with technology in co-viewing situations, but there are times maybe when children would prefer to look at a photograph alone. And that, I think we can provide that balance for children. So these principles of learning should permeate all of our work with technology as well as our other educational goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see.
It's very Fred Rogers, isn't it? What a wonderful list. So let me talk a little bit about how we've kind of mashed this up. We took all those reports that I mentioned earlier. We've been reading them along the way. We started with the position statement, obviously. And we're coming to some agreement in the field about what matters most and what is important for us to pay attention to. So I'm just going to tick through these quickly. Relationships, we put number one. It's all about interactions and relationships. I love interactive media, but I want it to be interactive media with interactions with other people. So we're really putting an emphasis on that. Co-viewing and parent engagement, yes. Social and emotional learning, we mentioned. Early years essentials, I'll come back to what I mean by that, but that's a little bit of that. What does a child need to do every day, and then what time is left for technology? Content, context, and quality is another measure for us. Children being media creators, the need for teacher preparation, which we know is still a challenge in our teacher education system. We're slow to respond to the pace of technology, so we need to do better at preparing pre-service teachers to use technology, and then, of course, lots of work to help in-service teachers. Family engagement and digital media, how do we use the tools that parents have in their hands, like a smartphone, to connect and communicate more effectively? That's a big idea. And then this notion of how are adults using media. So relationships matter. I think I've said that pretty well. Again, I'm just going to leave this on the screen. I'm not going to read all the words for you. But this notion of using tech to promote healthy social and emotional development often takes educators by surprise, because they're thinking that when we talk about technology in the early years, we're talking about cognitive development, learning, tools for learning, and we certainly are. But we're also talking about the opportunity for the use of these tools to engage children with each other. And we see the iPad, the touch screen, as an invitation for engagement, so that's really great. Sorry, this thing keeps kind of jumping on me. And then using media together leads to more learning. We know this from book reading, right, from early literacy. Children learn more when they sit with an adult and read a book. We are learning the same thing about screen-based learning experiences. Here's a quote from the position statement. When used wisely, technology and media can support learning and relationships. Enjoyable and engaging shared experiences that optimize the potential for children's learning and development can support children's relationships both with adults and with their peers. So that comes right out of the position statement and shows you that even in 2012, we were really committed to this notion of these being tools to help children, to help develop the whole child, and to focus on social-emotional learning. We know that developmentally appropriate practice really matters. Here's another quote from the statement. Technology and interactive media are tools that can promote effective learning and development when they're used intentionally by early childhood educators within the framework of developmentally appropriate practice to support learning goals and learning goals established for individual children. I always have to tell one story here. The position statement from NAEYC had come out in 1996. So that was the last time it had been updated. It was now 2012. We didn't really think we'd learn much from that 1996 statement because, that was old school, old technology. We went back and read it, and we learned a lot because it was grounded in developmentally appropriate practice, and it was looking at the tools of that time and how educators could use them. So I think that's really important. Roberta, anything to add about developmentally appropriate?
I think that getting that match is the most critical thing, and our assumption is that early childhood professionals will be able to do that if they consider it wisely.
Yep. So here's early child essentials. Take a look at the screen. What would be on your list? What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that children must experience in a day, in a week, in a month, in their early years, right? The kinds of things that you believe really matter and really promote healthy development. So this is Chip's list. Your list would look differently, I'm sure, but you get the point here. What Roberta and I were saying back in 2012 and 2009, 10, 11, and 12 was that these things can't go away. If these are the essentials, if this is what we as early childhood educators know really matters, then they will continue to really matter in the digital age. And it's our job to make sure that technology enhances or promotes or extends that, or that we don't use the technology when there are opportunities to extend these things or provide these opportunities for learning that aren't technology mediated. That there's always that choice of if and when. So think about your own essentials. Think about your own young children or the children in your classroom and what you believe are the core experiences they need to have, and then make sure they have them. Don't let technology get in the way of what we know is most important. This is a really big one, and one we've had a lot of fun thinking about at the Tech Center in our work. It turns out that in the digital age, children can be media creators, not just media consumers. And therefore, we have to really think about ways to help them create media, to move from just consuming to making meaning with the media, taking that picture of the worm crawling outside that Roberta mentioned before, and then coming inside and learning more about it. Creating media and then digital storytelling. These are trends and exciting ideas that we're talking about here at the Tech Center, and that we think is really where this is all going. It's really about the affordances of the device more than a particular app. It's about what can children do. If you look at those 4 images, they're all creating media with the same thing, with a simple digital camera. And when Roberta and I get asked what's the one thing you ought to have in your classroom, we answer quickly, a digital camera. And of course, many of us have one in our pocket all the time if we carry a smartphone. But this notion that children can record something, can reflect on it, can go back to it, can tell a story about it, can do a painting or build something around it, can email it to their parents, this starts to get really exciting with the notion of children creating their own media. And then, of course, teacher preparation matters. And I mentioned the IOM report, and I mentioned the USDOE report, and certainly the ISTE standards as well. A lot of words on the screen, so I'll let you just take a moment to take a look. But the meaning here is that teachers need to be able to integrate technology. Therefore, they need to be prepared to integrate technology. So it goes back to how we prepare teachers from the very beginning for the digital age, and our teachers getting the experiences they need to confidently use technology in the classroom. And we know, we really know the answer to that for a lot of us was no. We either didn't get it or we're not getting it. So we're always trying to nudge our colleagues in teacher education and ourselves as well to think about what do we need to do to better prepare the teachers of tomorrow with the tools of today rather than the tools of yesterday. It can be a challenging situation, but I think higher ed needs to step in to this conversation along with the rest of us. Okay, another audience poll around professional development, since we just talked about that. What professional development activities have best supported your integration and learning about technology and interactive media in your classroom? And you can see a list of choices there, so this can be a multi-choice response. And again, back to NAEYC for this one.
Okay, great, thank you. We have sent the poll, and so that should be appearing on people's screens shortly, and this time we'll give it just about 10 or 15 seconds. These are pretty straightforward choices here. Okay, and the results should be appearing in just a moment.
Oh, I love early childhood educators because one thing we're most predictable about is we want to get our hands on these things. And what we've learned in the Tech Center is if teachers don't have playtime, low-stakes playtime before they integrate technology with children, then it doesn't go as well. You don't feel as confident because you don't understand how the tool works. So thanks for that. This is very interesting. We put a lot of energy into different kinds of things. I think it's also great to see that we still want to get together to learn about technology. We still want to be in a face-to-face setting. We want to get to questions and answers, so I'm going to tick through the end here. This is a long one, but I think important in the work that I've been doing in the last year around family engagement and media mentorship. Technology tools offer new opportunities for educators to build relationships, maintain ongoing communication, and exchange information and share online resources with parents and families. Likewise, parents and families can use technology to ask questions, seek advice, share information about their child, and feel more engaged in the program and their child's experiences there. That comes from the position statement in 2012, and what it really captures is what I learned doing the work on the book is that we need engagement strategies that are push and pull, where we're sending information and we're getting information back from parents, not just always pushing information at parents. And then we need to be aware of the challenges and the opportunities. When the integration of technology and interactive media in early childhood programs is built upon solid developmental foundations, and early childhood professionals are aware of both the challenges and the opportunities, educators are positioned to improve program quality by intentionally leveraging the potential of technology and media for the benefit of every child. And that's kind of bedrock stuff for those of us who worked on the position statement. There are challenges, there are opportunities, there are appropriate ways to think about technology and inappropriate. That's where we really call on our own professionalism. I often hear educators say, I don't know anything about technology, and I'll remind them that they know a lot about child development and early learning and developmental appropriate practice and matching tools to children's needs. So you actually have a lot of information that you need to get started with technology. We're going to stop here and let the questions flow from all of you because it's been an active chat in the background.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was absolutely terrific. Sabrina, Roberta, and Chip, I really cannot thank you enough. Your presentation has generated lots and lots of questions from the audience. I'm going to quickly dispense with one that has come up multiple times, just showing how much people have enjoyed this, which is asking about being able to access the webinar later on. Absolutely. Those of you who registered will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recorded webinar. So, and that will be something you can share with your colleagues as well. So thank you guys for signing up. So I am going to do my best to digest and summarize and combine questions so we can cover as many of them as possible here in the time that we have remaining. So I'm going to start with a question that I think is mostly for Chip and Roberta, but I think people would love to have Sabrina chime in with an example too, which is essentially going back to that guidance from the pediatrician. It was saying that 2 to 5-year-olds should have no more than 1 hour a day of media. Lots of folks chimed in to say that they were sure that the children in their classrooms were getting more than that at home, and they're wondering, does that mean that they should avoid technology? Does it mean that one of their roles is really to provide a break from technology? Or did it actually mean that they needed to focus on more advanced uses of technology, more meaning-making and creation? So you guys can decide who wants to dive in first on that.
Go for it, Roberta.
Well, okay, I'll jump in. I think one of the things we want to make sure is that children are using technology to create things, that they're not just passively watching television. And I think that sometimes that their experience at home may be more passive viewing. And so any way that we can engage them in the classroom where they're actually the producers of technology, whether it's taking a photograph and figuring out how to put it into a book or dictating a story on the audio, using audio, and then putting that together with photographs. I think those are the kinds of things that we know will be most helpful to children in their learning in the classroom. Chip, other things?
I can also interject.
Yeah.
Yes, Sabrina.
If I can also interject, one of the things that we do here at Eagle Academy is we give the students choice at their learning center, and an iPad is placed at the learning center. So it's at the child's discretion, at their disposal. There's an iPad that's got the apps that they're familiar with on there, and it's got a camera, and they can choose to embed the technology into their learning, such as at My Dramatic PlayStation in kindergarten. They can actually record their production that they put on their story, or they can just take pictures of how they've recreated their story. So, for example, my students were doing stone soup, and they were literally, I have a pot, and I have all the foods, and the stone, and the whole nine, and they recorded it, and after they recorded it, they watched it with some of their peers, and they were able to ask those higher-order thinking questions and talk about the experience. So it enhances what they do if it's done purposefully.
And I think you're right, Sabrina, One example that I remember is a child who pulled up an eye chart. She was pretending to be a doctor, and she pulled up the eye chart on an iPad and had it sitting there, and had her friends reading the eye chart. And so I think if we just look at it as more as a natural tool that can be useful, right, it's really helpful, and integrate it into their play.
Exactly.
Let me add a comment about time, because I think this is really critical and people are asking the right question. I was very frustrated by the AAP's 1 hour because it didn't feel realistic to me, and so much of the rest of that statement felt like it was so supportive of parents and so encouraging of parents, and suddenly we set up a barrier that parents are going to feel like they're violating or not living up to. So I think that's important. So let me just make a general statement. Time matters. Time is a metric. How long a child does anything, watching the screen or anything else, matters. And parents and educators have, that clock that's inside of them that says enough is enough. But just time, if that's all we do is say it's 1 hour and don't have any other measurements, then we miss the opportunity. Because what really we want to talk about is the content. Is it high quality content? Is the child really interested? Is it something the child wanted to learn about or do? What's the context? When, where, how, who is the child using media with? How engaged are they? And then I always want to ask about the opportunity for interactions and relationships. So if I've got a child who is really engaged with an adult on something they're really interested in, and they're learning and they're playing and they're having fun, I'm not so sure at the end of that hour I need to say stop. Right? So I think be careful about the limit set up based on time. Set your limits based on level of engagement, quality of content, and the context, and I think you'll feel better about that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. I'm going to take several more questions and combine them, and this is going to be a challenge for you guys. So there have been several questions, Sabrina, specifically for you about your instructional approach. And just if you could have a few more details in terms of the extent to which you're using guided inquiry and the children are doing research, to the extent to which occasionally you are folding in direct instruction. You just gave us the example of the Dramatic Play Center and how the technology is just one of many options. I think there's hunger among the audience members for more of those details and insight into the different ways that you use technology. And then for all three of you, I think there's a couple other questions that we could put together here. One specifically about small group work and this notion of the teacher needing to be present versus children being able to work together. So specifically, how much does the teacher need to be present for small group work with technology if the children are actually working well together? Essentially, does that count as co-viewing and co-participation? And then to add in the challenge that I promised, if in answering these questions you could also focus on situations where budgets and technology are limited. So maybe a situation where there is a smart board but nothing else in the classroom. Maybe a situation where a classroom has 20, 25 students but only 2 tablets. What can you say in terms of folding in technology in some of these more typical situations of limited resources? So I'm sorry to combine all that together, but in the interest of time, Sabrina, jump in, please.
Yeah, go for it, Sabrina.
I can speak from my classroom directly. I have a tech captain, and the tech captain is responsible for making sure that all students have access to whatever technology is available. I can honestly say that my tech captain asks the students first, and my tech captain is 5 or 6, and that captain would ask the students, would you like to a tablet or would you like to use a smart board? And so that student has been taught how to access the apps that they want. Would you like to make a book, or do you want to do a draw? We use Drawing Pad, we use Book Creator, we use Doodlecast, we use Telegami, we use Puppet Pal. So we taught them in tech time. So in the beginning of the year, when we go over the rules and procedures and we do guided discovery, tech was one of our guided discoveries. So for a few days, we introduce those applications to the students in order to integrate how we're using it in our classroom. Directly instructing the students, I do it as a whole group on my smartboard, and a lot of times I'll give them the app and let them shoot me feedback for whatever the process may be. If we're adding or subtracting, I can shoot them a question and they can send back the answer, or I can just watch them develop their own strategy and their higher order thinking process as to how to deliver how they would like to problem solve in math. So it just depends on what we're doing, but I try my best as I'm planning out my central question and my directed instruction, my I do, we do, you do. I add tech to that so I can give the option to students as I'm delivering that instruction to embed tech into their response. So if they were using pen and paper or if they were using markers and crayons, tech is just an added modality for them to be able to address whatever the response might be. If I am trying to get them to write, they can have the option of writing on a tablet. If I am getting them to dance, they have the option of using tech to have their music and to show them what to do if they're learning a new skill. So it's just a matter of teaching them and making it a part of guided discovery so they know what to do when they're using their tablet or the smartboard purposefully. And all of my students do have tablets as a resource in the classroom. I'm hoping that answered most of that question.
That was great, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Wonderful
I tried to put it all
response.
in there.
That was awesome.
Let me jump in on the question about co-viewing. When we talk about co-viewing, of course we mean co-viewing with the adults, but it's also co-viewing among children. So just as children might be working together on a mural, they might be using an iPad to work together on something, and that doesn't mean that the adult isn't monitoring, just as we monitor their block play and other sorts of things. But it doesn't mean that it has to be teacher-directed or that the adult has to decide what the children are doing with it. So I think when we give children the freedom to explore technology, they come up with some really interesting ways of integrating technology and using it to create. And that's what we want to focus on.
Yeah, I agree, and it can be a conflicting message. No parent has the ability to sit by their child every time the child has a screen experience. It's not going to happen. So that parenting without presence or teaching without presence really has to do with level of engagement, and you can engage by being adjacent. You can engage by being in the kitchen making dinner and asking questions about what the child's seeing on the screen. So there are levels of engagement here. I think what the AAP was really saying is that the challenge is we're there, the parents are there, but they are not paying attention or engaged in a way that's supporting the child's use of technology or even aware of it. And so the same thing can happen in classrooms. And Roberta's right. Teachers need eyes in the back of their heads, and they move around the classroom and sometimes just seem to show up at the right place at the right time because they sense that something's happening or not happening. So I think it fits into your practice, but we didn't mean to say that every time a child has a screen experience, it needs to be with someone else.
Okay. I am going to jump in here with one question that we're going to do as speed round. So these will be your final remarks and final question to answer. Piggybacks right on what Chip was just saying. We've had several questions related to helping families understand better uses of technology, and even someone specifically asking for a poster or a public service announcement type of resource with tech tips, just to post somewhere where parents would see it. So if you just had, like, for each of you, your top 1, 2, or 3 tips for family use of technology and your farewell and thanks. We really appreciate your time today.
Okay, I'll just very quickly, I talked about media mentors. Parents need to be knowledgeable enough and confident enough to guide their children's use of media. That means they need to also be aware enough of their own use. So we've got to, if we want children's home media experiences to be positive, then we do actually need to support parents and empower them. Again, Fred wouldn't have wanted us to be critical of parents. He would wanted us to find their strengths and help them make good choices.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Chip. And I think that if there's one thing that adults can do is to just be more intentional about their own use of media and technology and the models that they're providing for the children, because children, they learn from the adults who are important to them.
In addition to
Sabrina,
in addition to the Fred 6, I would say the technology should transform, be authentic, be social, be hands-on, be intentional, and extend learning through it as a useful tool, both at home and in the classroom.
Awesome.
Good.
Roberta, would you read the final quote from Fred? I know we're out of time.
Sure. I would like to. A final provocation from The Little Prince, one of Fred Rogers' favorite quotations, what is essential is invisible to the eye. And he reminds us over and over again that we should not get so fascinated by what the technology can do that we forget what it can't do. It's through relationships that we grow best and learn best. So those words of wisdom from the essential provocateur.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you all so very much. I promised everyone a really wonderfully well-spent hour, and you have absolutely delivered. I know that I have learned an enormous amount, and I'm quite sure just looking at the audience questions here that that's true for all of us. So thank you so much. And again, to the audience members, you will receive an email tomorrow that will allow you to access the recorded version of this webinar. From all of us at NAEYC, thank you so very much.